Hello everyone! Welcome to my wrap-up for the month of October. You may have seen my TBR as my last video, and in that TBR I lied, and I said A Time of Courage would be the first book of November, but I finished in October, which means I finished 8 books in the month of October. Granted, one of them was kind of an audiobook that I would just listen to for like, I don't know, 10 or 15 minutes a day, that I've been listening to for like 4 or 5 months. So I actually only read about a third of it in October. No, less than a third. But still, I finished 8 books. We had one book, that audiobook, that was bad. One book that I posted my review of, The Stand, that I was kind of mixed on. We had 2 rereads that were Codex Alera, and therefore fantastic. And I read Of Blood and Bone by John Gwynne, the entire trilogy, which was pretty damn good. Let's talk about it. Now, I know what you might be thinking to yourself. Jake, you said you read 8 books, and then you just described 7 books, like 20 seconds later. Well, that's because I forgot about Dune. So when I described what I read before, I was lying. I somehow forgot the best-selling science fiction book of all time. This was right after Battleground, which was a very different read, but I fell on the side of people who really liked Dune. I thought it was really thought-provoking. I really enjoyed the way it was told. It's third-person omniscient, and you're just constantly bouncing between people's heads. And for political scheming, it really gives you a full picture of what's going on. Overall, I would warn people who are starting this book that at the beginning, you just kind of get tossed into the deep end, and Frank Herbert says swim or you will drown. I personally found, my advice would be for the first few chapters, accept the fact that you don't know what a bunch of the words mean, and just trust that it will make sense later. But this ended up being a really rewarding read. And I guess I read the appendix as well. Someone on Discord bullied me into reading the appendix, but that was worth it. This, I think, did earn its spot as the best-selling sci-fi book of all time. The only thing that held it back from being, even better is, while the characterization was good, I don't think it had anyone who I would consider among my favorite characters. But overall, I would highly recommend Dune. I would go in the right mind frame. So my score for Dune was a 9 out of 10. I really love this book. So, after Dune, I continued with my reread of Codex Alera with Princeps Fury, and I'm going to go out of chronological order and just talk about both the Codex Alera books I read very briefly. As I already talked about the series on my last wrap-up. But yeah, the conclusion to this series is great. I think I go back and forth between my favorite book in this series being Princeps Fury and Cursor's Fury. But I think really the cast of characters is just, they have so much personality and go through really great arcs. I would highly recommend this. Also, some of the best big battles. There goes the cat. Some of the best battles in fantasy as well. Really solid pacing. I would highly recommend this series. I gave Princeps Fury a 9.3 out of 10. I love this book. And then First Lord's Fury a 9 out of 10. So both got, I guess that would be 4.5 stars, but on Goodreads they show up as 5 stars. I love this series. I would highly recommend it. I've been trying to get people to read it, and for some reason people read Dresden and don't. But there you go. Codex Alera. It was a great conclusion, but these were both rereads, so that wasn't exactly a surprise. So, in between those 2 Codex Alera books, I read this absolute thick boy. We have to hit the book. It's a big paperback. Sorry, everybody. I'll stop hitting books. But I already have a review up of The Stand, but overall, I was mixed on it. This was basically the book that I think shows me that even though characterization is the most important part of a story, I can't just have really good characterization. Because that's really, the characterization carried this book into still me being more positive than negative, but very little other than that worked for me, other than that and the general premise. Still managed, just because of the characters, a 5.8 out of 10. By the way, so the way my rating system works is a 5 is as much good as bad. I don't like saying average because I haven't read every book, so I don't actually know what an average book looks like. So I liked it more than I disliked it, but not by a lot. This also took me 9 days to read, both because I wasn't reading it super fast, because it didn't hook me, but also just because it's huge and has tiny font. This was a behemoth, but I have more in-depth thoughts on that, which I will link in the description. But the Stephen King fans may not be a huge fan of that. Sorry. So, for the next 3 books that I'm going to talk about, I basically read them all back to back. Actually, I did finish the audiobook in between book 1 and 2 of these, but I'll talk about that last, since these are all kind of connected. And that is that I read Of Blood and Bone by John Gwynne, all back to back, basically rapid fire. I was expecting to read this in November, but John Gwynne books tend to be page-turny, so I did finish them faster than I expected. This one, I actually don't have a reason to not talk about the books, like Codex Alera was talked about it a bunch in the previous wrap-up. Stand, I already have a review, so these will probably get more time now. In general, for John Gwynne, I think he writes really solid books. I would recommend them to people who, this is kind of the strengths, is he writes really good action and battles, battles that you won't ever feel the need to skim, or at least I didn't ever feel the need to skim. And sometimes during action, I don't skim anyways, but sometimes it kind of gets repetitive, and I very, very rarely feel like John Gwynne action ever gets repetitive. I also think John Gwynne and his entire Banished Lands sequence is a really good series to read if you just want to see friendships that are, like, really loyal friendships. You don't want to see, like, dysfunctional friendships. You want to see, like, the good guys are pretty wholesome in here. Like, they're not perfect, they definitely have their flaws, but it's also not like, even something like, I don't know, what's an example? Wheel of Time. I love Wheel of Time, but, for example, Matt Coffin is not exactly the best friend, always, to Rand. Or even, like, Lord of the Rings, you got Boromir. Granted, Lord of the Rings also has some of the most wholesome bromances ever, but this is one, if you really want kind of the friendships to really be, I'd say, like, the social fabric of some aspects of this world is very strong, where you have people who really clearly live to try and be, like, honest and loyal friends. It also has both pure evil villains and more nuanced villains. Overall for this series, I did like The Faithful and The Fallen more than Of Blood and Bone. I think I have more, like, really character moments that I really connected to. A Time of Courage, though, the conclusion of Blood and Bone was really fantastic. And these were all really fast reads. I kind of basically thought, this one I had some issues with the ending. This one I had some issues with the beginning, but this was damn good throughout. So if you're looking for a series that, doesn't have friends betraying each other and, like, getting angry at each other for no reason and miscommunicating, and you want, like, the allies to, I guess, embody truth and courage, as they say a lot, I think this is a really good series. It does get, some people who haven't read it, like, people act like it's grimdark. It's not at all grimdark. Like, it's just no. The only way I guess, grimdark at all is John Gwynne is not afraid to kill characters. He will really kill people a lot. And also, one thing that made me like the first series more is, for the first 2 books, most of the character deaths, I was pretty close to predicting the character deaths, and I thought some notes were kind of getting repeated, but then book 3 of A Time of Courage, which did earn 9.1 out of 10 from me. This was the first one to really get me with the character deaths, but the first series as well. Don's brutal to his characters, man. I think, like, George R. Martin level of kills his characters. And I think that's why some people might think it's grimdark, but it isn't grimdark at all. If you go in expecting grimdark, you're going to be disappointed. And if you're avoiding it because you think it's grimdark, it's not. There are definitely... there's pretty clear divides of good and evil, and every book has people you can root for. I would really... I recommend it. I thought it was a really solid series. I didn't think it had any true weaknesses. Nothing also stood out as, like, the best I've seen in the genre. Maybe the action. The action would probably be, like, S tier. But everything is, like, a solid B or A, essentially. Pacing is also really fantastic. Really no spots where it feels like the plot's spinning its wheels. So, would absolutely recommend everything by John Gwynne. Definitely read A Faithful and the Fallen first. Do not start with Of Blood and Bone. I think the first series is better anyways, even if the first book is the weakest. I still think the first book is pretty good. Every book has been at least 4 stars for me, with Ruin and A Time of Courage being 5. My ratings for these books were 8.2 out of 10 for A Time of Dread, 8.4 out of 10 for A Time of Blood, and 9.1 for A Time of Courage, which was my highest rated new book of the month, but I still like Princeps Fury more. Anyway, now we are going to talk about the audiobook, and I'm going to be less positive, so embrace yourself for that. For the 8th and final book that I, finished, I didn't actually listen to the entire thing, I finished listening to Wizard's First Rule. I know this book is very hated by many people, but I have seen people who really like it, and I was curious. So I've been listening to the audiobook for the last, 4 months, and I did not fall on the side of people who liked it. That being said, the largest criticism of it, I think, was overblown. I think the originality complaint was a bit overblown. It wasn't a particularly original work of fantasy, but I also don't think I would say it outright stole, except for, Smeagol is in it. It stole Smeagol. There's a character who has beat for beat the introduction of Smeagol and is literally described to look and smell like Smeagol and talks like Smeagol. But that's a minor part. It's only in 2 chapters out of a 50 chapter book. I didn't think there was one thing that brought this book down. It was just a combination of everything being below average. In terms of characters, there were 1.5 I was interested by. The half is because I was interested in Kaelin for some of the book, and then Zed was a pretty decent take on a wise wizard. But other than that, it's just pacing was wonky. The writing was really weird at times in terms of how much it lacked polish. I don't know how some of it got through the editor. There's just some stuff in there that's so repetitive and redundant. There's one part where someone out loud, the dialogue is we have to go over to Zed. Zed is over there. It'll all be fine after we talk to Zed. And I'm like, dude, only one of those sentences was necessary. You just basically said, sometimes people just say the same sentence, but, paraphrased. So, and, I don't get it. There's some, metaphors in there where I'm just how did this get through an editor? The worst one was, the pain hit him like a waterfall of icy water. How did that not get changed to the pain hit him like an icy waterfall? There certainly are some Deus Ex Machina moments. The magic system lacks internal consistency. It has very few hard rules in general. One of the only hard rules it has, it breaks. And also, I don't think the author really considered the implications of the rules. Like, there are these things called the confessors, and it's like, basically, if they touch you, you win, and they're seen as, like, unbeatable in one-on-one combat. They're not trained as fighters or anything, and I'm just like, how does that make any sense? Like, if you have a trained soldier with a spear against this person who has to touch you, yeah, they're gonna just stab you. And also, they don't wear armor, and bows and arrows exist in this world. So, anyway, there was also torture scenes, and they made me laugh because of how ridiculous some of the dialogue was. Wizard's First Rule was a bit of a disaster. It wasn't the worst book I've ever read, and it had some redeeming aspects, barely. I will say one of the redeeming aspects is, while the writing style is redundant, at least there are some writing styles that are redundant and also a mess. This one, at least, he accomplished being clear. You will always know what's going on. You will pretty much never be confused by what is happening while going through this book. But, like, all the compliments I have for it have an asterisk. Like, oh, yeah, what does Vin think of Wizard's First Rule? She probably thinks it's pretty, well, she doesn't like it because there was no physical copy, so she couldn't sit on the book while I was reading. So even the cat did not, like, enjoy my reading of Wizard's First Rule. I wouldn't recommend it. I gave it a 1.5 out of 10, and I think that's about the rating I'm going to sit on. So anyway, yeah, that about wrapped up my, my month of October. I got more books done. I got all the books done I was hoping to get done. Pretty good reading months. There was nothing, it wasn't quite as good of a reading month as September. Nothing was as good as Battleground. No new books were as good as Trouble with Peace or Little Hatred. But we had two great rereads in there. Dune was great. End of Blood and Bone was a really solid series. So overall, I would say that was a pretty successful month. I actually, even though it was 8 books instead of 10, actually, Goodreads says I read more pages, but it's probably counting Wizard's First Rule, because there's no way to tell Goodreads this. It wasn't actually pages, and also it just counts it all for this month, so I probably actually read less pages. Anyway, everyone let me know in the comments what you read in the month of October, and what your thoughts are on the books I read here, except for The Stand. I've heard about that enough. Enjoy your reading, everyone. Also, side note, let's see if future editing me changes the outro and intro. I don't know because I haven't done it yet, but you're about to find out. So probably you can tell by the music playing right now.